Today we have our Kevin Smith with us, building winning relationship with national or non-governmental organizations. The Wednesday webinar, you guys are all familiar with it. If you have any ideas for speakers or for topics, please send them to me and I will do my best to get somebody scheduled to address that. This is a safe space. There are no stupid questions. I will be monitoring the chat all day. So if you would like to raise your hand, unmute, ask Kevin a question yourself, you are welcome to do that. Otherwise, you may put it in the chat and I will make sure that he sees it. I will share a copy of the chat transcript in the follow-up email. I'll also send out a follow-up email later this week or early next week with a link to the recording. As always, the recording is going to be on our YouTube channel. So today we have building winning relationships with non-governmental organizations. Emergency management is rarely recognized or held accountable for shortcomings in mitigation and long-term recovery. However, when individuals are seen without food, water, or shelter, public scrutiny and media attention quickly focus on perceived failures of the system, often blaming county, state, or federal leadership. These critical needs fall under the umbrella of mass care, a responsibility frequently delegated to nonprofit partners, who are then positioned to either succeed or struggle without sufficient support. This session will highlight the importance of proactively building strong relationships with nonprofit organizations to tell the full story of emergency management. By fostering collaboration, we can better showcase the collective efforts of the whole community in both disaster response and recovery. As I mentioned, our featured speaker today is Kevin Smith. He is the president and CEO of Rule 1 Consulting. Kevin Smith is a certified emergency manager with over 25 years of experience spanning federal, state, and local government, as well as nonprofit leadership. He began his career in 1996 with the Salvation Army, leading disaster operations across major incidents, including 9/11, Hurricane Katrina, and multiple federally declared events. From 2005 to 2008, he served as a national disaster specialist for Feeding America, where he built national response capabilities across food banks and frontline agencies. In 2018, Kevin was appointed the director of DHS Center for Faith and Opportunity Initiatives. There he launched the first faith-based advisory council to a cabinet secretary and served as the designated federal officer to the Faith-Based Security Advisory Council. He played a key role in federal coordination with the faith and the community groups during major events such as Hurricanes Irma, Maria, the southern border humanitarian crisis, and the COVID-19 pandemic. In 2021, Kevin founded Rule 1 Consulting, where he helps nonprofits, businesses, and government clients build effective emergency management programs, scale mission-driven initiatives, and navigate crisis recovery. He has secured over $50 million in funding for nonprofit programs and brings expertise in strategic philanthropy, trauma-informed crisis response, and organizational resilience. He is a graduate of Harvard's National Preparedness Leadership Initiative and a recipient of the Distinguished Service Awards from both the National Hurricane Conference and the Florida Governor's Hurricane Conference. So please join me in a virtual round of applause welcoming Kevin to this presentation. Kevin, I'm going to stop my share and you have control of the screen. You may introduce yourself, say hello, and then share your screen and start your presentation.
Well, you give me a whole lot of confidence to be able to do this. So I'm going to hopefully do this effectively so you can see the presentation, and I hope I don't screw it up. Let me see here. Make sure you got the right slide. Can you see my slide now? Oh, man. Outstanding. Outstanding. Thank you, David. And listen, I know half of you fell asleep during that. I apologize for the long dissertation. I overstated my qualifications. Just I need to make those paragraphs down to like a one sentence. So I apologize if you're already asleep. So I'll try to make it as entertaining as I can to really tell the stories and championship the role of building partnerships with NGOs. And I'm gonna make it because I'm a big trainer. I am heavily invested and helping people to understand through effective training. So you might feel like you're taking some kind of a training course. And I apologize. I'm not going to put you in small groups, but I do want to kind of hit you with a couple of things, and I want you to interact if you can. First thing I want to do is I want to ask you to write down either on your computer, if you are a Hurricane Katrina graduate or older, you may probably want to do this on a sheet of paper. Everybody, since Katrina, you may want to use a computer or some kind of tab to write your answers down to my questions. The first one is, I want you to write down, as we go into this, 10 NGOs that you know and trust. Now, I want you to rapid fire on whatever tool you have around you. Just rapid fire, write down, scribble it out. You got a couple seconds to pull that together. 10 NGOs that you know and trust. I'm going to pause because everybody likes to not hear my voice. I'll give you a second to write at least a few of those down. Pause. No, some people are ticked off that I'm having interaction here. You thought you could just sleep your way through. I'm making you work for it. All right. Give me your best shot. How many of you, you don't have to raise it, but just a signal if you're on camera, how many of you named the American Red Cross? Anyone? Yep. Got the American Red Cross? Good. Good. It's usually the first one that people go to, especially people in emergency management, but largely anybody that watches NFL football, American Red Cross pops in their head. Well, let me ask you this. How many of you named a house of worship from the community you're in? Any faith, doesn't matter. How many of you listed one of those houses of worship? Okay, good. We got at least one there. That's a positive. And how many of you are stuck on the question of, is an NGO a VOAD? How many of you are arguing or debating over in your head, wait a minute, I know I have a VOAD. I know these are VOADs. Are NGOs VOADs? Well, I hope by the end of the time that I'm talking to you, I'll give you a little bit better understanding of what I'm talking about when we're talking about building successful relationships, because they're not limited to your preconceived notion of what a VOAD, an NGO, a VOLAG, if you're really old like me, you've been around a long time, understanding what this terminology is. The truth of the matter is, VOAD is a name of organization or an association of organizations. If you have been around this for a long time, you've heard the term VOAD explained to you. It's organizations coming to the table to work together to collaborate on disaster response. So you get your big players like the Salvation Army, the Red Cross, and maybe the Mennonites. And some of you know many more of those organizations because you've had a lot of experience lately of those playing in this role. But what you need to know is when we say national VOAD or a VOAD, it's actually not an organization. It's no different than any other association of members that currently exist for whatever initiative that they are partnering on. Sometimes people get confused and they're like, well, they're a VOAD, or since they are a member of VOAD, then that gives them some esteemed collaboration that I have to know and trust that organization. And conversely, we make another assumption is that if they're not a VOAD, I don't trust them or don't know them or don't need them in the disaster space. And that sometimes can be a real problem. So NGOs or nonprofit organizations, they may be VOADs, but quite frankly, and I'm trying to get rid of all these pictures on my face because I can't even see my own slide, so if you'll give me a second. But there are many nonprofit organizations that are not members of VOAD, and there's a lot of reasons for that. It doesn't delegitimize somebody because they're not a member of an association that you know or you've had experience with. But largely, the most effective at organizations in a local community don't even know that a VOAD exists. And a matter of fact, any one of these organizations that I want you to identify as we go through this conversation today is there's a lot of organizations out there that do work that VOADs don't do, that traditional nonprofit organizations don't do. And that's what we want to talk about is all of those organizations plus the ones that you may have never heard about and why it's important on building relationships them, whether it's in the community you live and you're representing as a PIO, or whether it's one that you've been mobilized to do mutual aid in support of, understanding that there is power in the role of these nonprofit partners, and you can be the advocate to helping them to do more and be a more effective. And let me just offer that any nonprofit, any of them, they may provide disaster services, and there's literally no legal authority that says that you can stop them from offering disaster services unless they've done something illegal, or they're in an area that is limited access due to safety or security for some legal reason. But otherwise, if I'm a mom and pop who just have a nonprofit, or somebody that just wants to do good in your community, you can't stop them from doing good. So let's embrace them and see how we can move along. David, just going to check here, make sure my Wi-Fi signal's carrying. You can hear me okay?
Loud and clear. You sound great.
Awesome. Well, that might be the first time I've ever had anybody tell me I actually sound great. Usually it's not that positive. So as I have kind of given you this conversation about VOADs, and this is not a VOAD presentation, but it's one that a lot of people get stuck on. So I want to kind of help you navigate that space for a second. First of all, is that many of you may ask, well, we don't have a VOAD in our community. And as a result, you feel like for some reason that doesn't make sense, that why don't we have one in our community? And I will tell you, especially in our rural communities, VOADs tend to be really strong where there are large national organizations with affiliates in their local community. But many of the rural communities, you don't have those national players or even your statewide players because they just don't have an office in your community. So it's very hard to sustain leadership to an organization or an association of members at the local level if you don't have that influx of those large organizations that can provide staffing. And this is the majority of our states and local government. This is what you have to face with every day. You're needing people that can represent in your local community, not somebody that comes from Richmond or comes across from Lexington down to your rural community down in Danville. And I don't know if I just gave a shout out to anybody in particular there. Not sure where all of you are from. But since I did go to college in Wilmore, Kentucky, I feel like I can drop a few references of what I know exist. And then in some communities, you just don't have the leadership of nonprofits where they have enough staff or strength to carry on that experience of VOAD. But it doesn't delegitimize that there's going to be activity in your community and that they're legitimately going to be serving. And for those of you that are in a community that are like, well, we've never even heard of VOAD, we only hear the word COAD and we don't have a clue what that means. Well, you are in a mix of a lot of people, because COAD was a term that came out of many communities that didn't have those national organizations, but had some very strong interested partners that were local, that were locally based, that really didn't fit the mold or the bylaws. Many of you know the struggles of dealing with bylaws, but they didn't fit the norm for their community. So they created something called a Community Organizations Act of Disaster, so that a mom and pop, even non-governmental, a local government agency or a local for-profit company, could actually come to the table. And that didn't meet the VOAD really rules and regulations. So they created a concept that said the Community Organizations Active in Disaster, and they became more effective for that community. The truth is, it's the same thing, but it's different. And if that didn't just confuse you, I just want to make sure you know that that does not make an organization effective, good, bad, or indifferent. And I won't tell you that I'm a fan of one or the other, one's better than the other. It just is the terminology and jargon you'll often hear when somebody says, is this a good NGO? Is this a good nonprofit? Well, not if they're not a VOAD member. Well, that's not really true. It just happens to be that the associations help to bring people together when you have good leadership and sustainability. So I hope I have broken the COAD VOAD issue that many of you, I'm sure, have as a big concern coming into this call. Anyway, I'm being a little facetious. I apologize. Let me talk about why these things matter. The truth of it is, it doesn't at all. What you call the organizations, it doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter that they come from some strong, long history organization, because many of the most effective organizations that we have seen in the last 25 years post-Katrina are organizations that were generated out of a major disaster in a community that was just interested in doing good. And those relationships, when you can build those relationships, welcome into your emergency management new and innovative concepts, you get a team like Team Rubicon that started small, but now is a massive powerhouse in responding to disasters. And there's many that we have across the board and in regions of the country who are very similar to that. They start with an interest in serving and they become large organizations over time. That can't happen if you're not a part of that. if you're not a champion for the work that they're doing when you see it, there's a role that you can play. And I'm going to talk about some of those things. The things that you need to know: NGOs, they don't have to be nonprofits. They don't have to be faith-based. They don't necessarily have to be not faith-based. They are just non-government. And that can be a lot of partners at the local level. Nonprofits are a specific type that talk about state notification as a nonprofit or a 501c3. And both of those are eligible to be partners with you in a community and serve. They can be local. You'll have regional, national, some of them are worldwide. You have World Vision is a major player in disaster relief. They are a worldwide organization, but they may have someone like Local Relief, an organization that's in a county in Sarasota, Florida, who actually generates and largely works around those communities and is looking to expand and go into other communities around the country. Because they don't have to fit in any one of these boxes. But that sometimes causes a problem for you, because you may have a Salvation Army in Lexington, but you may not have a Salvation Army in Danville. I know you do, but that's just another example. You may not have it in your rural community. Maybe you have regional representation that works out of Lexington to support your local community. And that's what you have to look for, is where are those players? And if it's a regional organization or national, how can I put my hands on them to access them? One of the challenges we have as PIOs and talking about how we identify who is a trusted organization or not is we got to figure out who they are when they come into our neighborhood. And just because they don't have a presence here before the disaster doesn't mean that they can't do very impactful work. All right. Sorry, I'm hammering that one a little too much, but it is often a problem. Some of these folks have robust disaster training programs. You're going to get people who come in that wear the absolute best badge you've ever seen. They're going to look like law enforcement. They'll have their own vest and they'll look really sharp. And then others are going to come in with torn t-shirts and not identified and can just work their butts off and do whatever you need. Some of them also have no clue what they're doing. And some of them, when you don't help or you're not communicating effectively with them, they do clothing drives. And I don't know if you see this picture very well. This was a food drive gone wild. And it is what food drives usually end up with: whatever people have in their closet or whatever they think that disaster survivors need, they throw them into a church gymnasium, and then they become what we call the second disaster. And that's because they had not received the word that just applying and saying, bring anything you can, it'll help, quickly becomes overwhelming and often becomes one of the largest issues we have in emergency management of dealing with donations management issues. I know that there's some questions being here, David, if there are things that I need to stop on, but I know we want to give some time at the end just to have an open dialogue. So I'm going to try and get through these slides that I'm sure are annoying some of you PowerPoint to death. So I apologize. All right, let me go to the next topic. Why do you care? Why do you need to build relationships, or why are we looking at building and winning relationships? Most of you, and this is the whole point of this call, is that you're PIOs. Your job is to get critical information, the emergency management officials or local elected officials. You're going to get it out to the community. What does that have to do with the nonprofits? Well, let me tell you what it does. Number one, those organizations provide food and hydration. If any of you are emergency management junkies, you should know the top 3 priorities of emergency management. It's save lives, provide incident stabilization, and the third is to protect property. Well, if you aren't feeding and having access to food and hydration to a community, they become the top priority. So ensuring that the organizations are serving in the community, knowing that they're out there serving your citizens, can create the opportunity for incident stabilization instead of making it a life-saving opportunity. Now, we're coming up on am I at the 20th anniversary or 25th anniversary of Katrina? I can't do my math. 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. I had the opportunity of responding in Katrina, and I will tell you, there were incidences across New Orleans and Mississippi where life safety was plucking people off the roof and taking them somewhere safe. But when you're just focused on saving lives and putting them somewhere without caring to make sure those people are being cared for, you end up with saving lives again because they weren't being taken care of their basic needs or necessities. And sometimes that visibility is not overly apparent to emergency management, because they're not listening to what the community is saying back of where support is needed. And I think that's very important for all of us to understand. We have a role of listening as much as we do about telling the story to be good public information officers or communicators during times of disaster. The other piece that they provide is emotional and spiritual care. Now, I'm going to say, when you as an effective PIO can tell the story of where people are receiving food and hydration, when you can talk about places they can go for emotional and spiritual care, when you can tell them that people are coming into their community to help, you are the one conveying to them that hope is on the way. And I will tell you, I've experienced this firsthand in every major disaster I have been on. Those effective communicators who understand that they are critically important, not that they are putting widgets in the hands of every person, but they are demonstrating that resources are on their way. Those are the ones who alleviate communities when people initially within 24 hours say, nobody's here to help. Well, when you are effective and you know that there are services being provided, you tell that story because you are the one who's bringing that hope to them. And most of them are willing to say, there are others who need it more. At least I know that help is on the way. Now, I know we don't have anybody on from North Carolina, and I'm not going to throw North Carolina under the bus. But man, we could have done such a better job to say, there are resources in the area. Here's where you can go to receive them. Here's where there are some logistical challenges in getting to the people. So we are staging operations to get resources to you. And it would have bought more time to allow them to know that hope is there are resources coming. They're just not there yet because it's logistically impossible. So as a PIO, you have to understand that your job is not just factual information. You are hope for many people that will hear your voice, whether that's through public information. Whether that is through a public radio source, radio stations, social media, or all of the above. You are the hope that's the only way they're going to find is coming to help save them. And then when you build and leverage the relationships with them, you actually can leverage the donations and resources that they have and turn them into valuable recovery tools. Now, some of you, if you've done this long enough, you've been around long enough, you've probably been a little perturbed at the way that maybe a nonprofit is trying to raise money and why they try to push so hard to get their message out to raise money. A quick story that I teach and have done this throughout my career is you have about a 72-hour window as a nonprofit to tell people what you are doing in the community to get the funding support to actually sustain you through the recovery. That is why you see a hard push from disaster relief organizations to tell you what they're doing on the ground. It's not so they can take a vacation in Aruba later and take all their executives on a sweet spa retreat. It's because if they don't tell their story when the media is looking, there's nobody to tell the story to when you're down in recovery. And that's when you need the most money to help you support throughout your organization. So you, as a PIO, can be helpful in ensuring that your community or the community you are serving in is helping to leverage the marketing, the attention of I call it the Eye of Sauron, because that's really the way the American public works in helping people. Sorry if you're not somebody might be a geek out there with Lord of the Rings, but if you'll know, like the Eye of Sauron, the American public just keeps turning its head. And it doesn't pay attention to a disaster very long, especially if there's something exciting that pops up on the news later. They all like to turn away from it. So you have a very small window to tell the story of those who are responding, to ensure that the people's stories are being told and that resources are being leveraged to help get to the most people. And there are some best pictures. It's supposed to be best practices of how emergency management. Oh, I'm sorry. It is best pictures. There are some amazing pictures of how emergency management can serve disaster survivors by supporting the nonprofits who are actually putting the food in the hands of the people. And there are some great best practices you can look at that will tell you, how did I, as a PIO, help get resources to a nonprofit so that the community that I'm supposed to be representing, they know that we are doing good, but they keep getting frustrated because it's not going exactly the way they want it. But I was able to tell them the story that here's how we as emergency management are helping the Salvation Army or Mercy Chefs or the Baptist teams. We are helping them get resources so they can reach into the community further. Otherwise, you may get a story out there that says, well, we can tell that the Baptists love us, but we haven't heard anything from emergency management. We haven't heard anything from our elected officials. And yet behind the scenes, there's a lot of partnership going on. So you need to be the voice to help tell how government cares and is partnering with those organizations. That's what meaningful relations are about. Now, I threw some pictures in here. If you don't like my pictures, blame Google, because I pulled them up from Google to make it pertinent for each of you. The question is, how do you build trust with the nonprofits, or how do you build those relationships that are winning, something that actually is beneficial to you and is beneficial to them? Number one, I would say, ensure that you have a strategy for telling your audience what it is that NGOs are doing in your community. Now, whether that's your house of worship down the street that just opened their doors and took in 5 families, or whether it's the Southern Baptist Disaster Relief who's doing 50,000 meals a day serving in your community. Doesn't matter. You have a strategy for highlighting those who are actually engaged in serving the community. It both gives them hope, but it also makes them energized that their community is helping each other. It gives them often an opportunity for volunteerism, and it gives them engagement. But oftentimes they don't hear that because the media is not paying attention to the little story. They need to be told, the media needs to be told, we see some great things happen in our community. Let me tell you about what happened today at Mercy Chef's site, where local volunteers and local houses of worship came together to serve those who were most impacted by this disaster. You become the inspiration that people need to see that people are caring for each other. I would ask or give opportunities to highlight the work. I know that many of you may know the former FEMA administrator, Craig Fugate. Whenever he went to the podium as a state director and when he was at the podium as the FEMA director, he always chose to highlight an organization that he knew was on the ground serving people so that it would gain energy of people supporting organizations that were on the ground, because he knew the value of nonprofits. And if you ever got into the jargon that Craig used every time he spoke, it's about the whole community serving each other and working through those local communities. And it is not about somebody coming in to save the day. It's about us serving each other and working locally with everybody at the table. And it doesn't have to be a flashy American Red Cross. It doesn't have to be a flashy Salvation Army. It can be that local house of worship, that synagogue, the mosque, the people who are serving in their community. And I'll give you permission right now. If a nonprofit comes to you and says, use my talking points tomorrow, and you have permission to ask, well, where are you serving? Let us come see where you're serving. We want to be a force multiplier, but we're not going to just do rhetoric on an ad and you're not actually serving in our community. And as a PIO, your job is not to be propaganda. Your job is to tell the truth and amplify the story of those who are working in your community. And I will caution you in that. Don't go with just those who you wrote down in your 10 membership, the people that I asked you early in the presentation. Don't go to just those people. Find out where the real work is being done in your community and then highlight it. I throw down here, I'm probably jumping around on this slide a little bit, but I want you to think a little bit like a politician as a PIO. How do you gain favor and how do you gain the audience's attention to what's going on about success of what we're doing in a community? You got to think like a politician. Bring your elected leaders to sit down at those sites where you see one of those organizations that you know and now trust. Bring them to the site and let them flop some hamburgers that are going to go out on the front line. Have them hand out a food box. You as the PIO have the opportunity to tell the story about volunteerism, about how hope is in the community because they're serving, and that your elected leaders care about what's going on and are supporting these organizations to do what they do. The media will follow whatever script you put out there in most cases. And sometimes they'll investigate you and be negative and all that stuff. But most of the time when you are championing the success, they will also replicate that in their newscast, and they will run that story about the success of an organization of helping people in the community. So take the opportunity at the podium, whether it's your elected official saying it or whether it's you saying it, is let me highlight a story today about the effectiveness of our partners on the ground the First Baptist Church or the First Methodist Church on XY Street or Main Street, who are serving the people food every day. These are your communities serving each other, and we're proud to call them partners here with our emergency management. You can hold your press conferences instead of doing it. Although I love your joint information centers, I love looking at the EOC with the busyness activity. Man, it's a lot better when you actually see people serving people. And if you can do that, run your press conference at a site where people are being served, it can make a big impact. And it will energize the nonprofit and their volunteers to say, hey, they recognized me serving. And there will be others that will step in and go, I want to be a part of this effort. I want to help our community recover. And dang it, I'm going to go where I see that people are serving. I'm not going to listen to somebody on the radio tell me what they're doing. If I don't see them doing it, then I'm going to go where I can contribute the most in my community. All right. I said this a minute ago. I kind of hit my points because I don't want to forget it. The importance of voluntary organizations, nonprofits, NGOs. You're helping to amplify their message, helps them to raise money. And you may not like that they're asking for money, but let me tell you, if they don't have money, they're not at the table in recovery. And if any of you have been through disasters, and I know a lot of you have, and man, you've had your share in Kentucky over the past couple of years. Let me tell you, as you have been impacted by those disasters, you know what it's like if they're not at the table for recovery, because that's where it's the hardest, is getting people and resources to the table at that time. Both of them are what drive not only demonstrating what they do, but raising money. You need both of those things to have those nonprofits at the table for the long-term community recovery. So incorporate their service into your press releases as much as possible. Reach out to them and say, hey, every day, could you do a sit rep? I mean, you and I know what a sit rep is. They may not know it. Tell us your story every day. Give us a human interest story. We want to highlight what you're doing and tell people about what you're doing. Tell us how many meals you did, how many food boxes you gave out, how many blankets, how many houses you put roofs on, or how many houses you patched. Because you can leverage the good of the nonprofits in serving residents as really the outflow of your jurisdiction's engagement with them. If you get their stats, it's another way of you saying, we as the county or in the have served over 1,500 people today. If you aggregate the number of all those voluntary agencies, their sit reps into your numbers, we as the county and our partners have served over 50,000 people today in our community. We are working to make sure you have the resources that are necessary to recover. And you can ride on the fact that you are mentioning those organizations, highlighting the work they do, but it's also telling a much bigger story of what your emergency management office is doing. Disaster survivors, they have to see the good stories to give them hope to their own recovery. Many times people are motivated by hearing someone else's success story. You can be that way of telling the stories of how other people are being helped. And it helps people get through the next 24, 48 hours. I'm not a mathematician. I apologize. And then encourage your emergency managers to support those NGOs with the resources that they can. I'm going to tell you from a testimonial, it drives me crazy. Of course, it would never happen in Kentucky. But I will tell you, there are resources under the Stafford Act that allow emergency management to reimburse nonprofits for what they do, as long as they're serving in mass care in the community. They're under the Stafford Act, they can get reimbursement for that. But you may have an emergency manager that's like, that's not my problem. I got to work on roads and bridges. If emergency managers are engaged and they know and can use nonprofits, NGOs at the local level to actually be a force multiplier and say, hey, we can reimburse you for the food cost you have. We can reimburse you for the services you're doing, sandbagging or any of those sheltering. If we can reimburse you for that, will that help you? And the emergency manager says, I didn't know that was possible. Well, it is. It's part of the Stafford Act. And you can be a champion of saying, I think there's a way we can support them. Let's go down and pursue that and ask if there's any way we can help those NGOs. And I'll tell you, some of your big players know how to do that. Some of your big partners, NGOs that have worked disasters in other states and other places, some of them know how to do that. But your local church doesn't know that. The local nonprofits that you rely on, especially in your rural communities so much, they don't know that they can have access to that stuff. So you being a PIO who loves to champion their stories and ride on the success of those organizations can also be an advocate for how emergency management can leverage resources to help support them do all the great things that they're doing. And I would challenge the public in general, as a PIO, you challenge them to be neighbors checking on their neighbors. You go be a part of the solution in your community, check on your neighbors. And if your neighborhood, if your church is everybody's okay in your congregation, then go help the nonprofits who are out there serving the rest of your community. Be a part of the solution, be a part of our response, and be a part of our recovery. And here's how you do it, because we've seen them on the ground working. It's up to you as PIOs to be the voice of emergency management. We can't do what we do without the public volunteering and engaging to help this community recovery. And you are the one that can help challenge them. And it gives you a great news story for you to get at the podium to champion long-term recovery. All right, I'm going to hit you all with one. If you're not an emergency management fan, if you haven't studied Papa G, the Public Assistance Program and Policy Guide, this one may not be something you know about. But there's a thing called the value of donated resources. It's part of Papa G. And it says for all of volunteerism that happens in the community, for all of the equipment that is used by nonprofits and NGOs, and all the stats they provide to support the community response, that has an actual cash value. All right, here it goes. Here is your job security for the next 20 years. If you aggregate the value of that and help the nonprofits to document that, that actually goes to offset your non-federal cost share for your community recovery. If a disaster cost you $100 million in your community and there is a federal declaration, you could offset the entire 25% or $25 million of that with donated resources from these same organizations who are just doing goodwill in your community. That is a Stafford Act public policy guide that tells you why meaningful relationships, winning relationships are so important to the local community. So I challenge you to know that, tell you why you're telling their story, because your emergency manager may not know how valuable that is to support those local NGOs and how much bang for the buck that they bring to the table when they are brought into the emergency management picture, into the public information sphere, and then ultimately aggregating that value. And then the last thing I would say, I think it's the last thing, is to incorporate NGOs in your rumor control. One of your primary jobs is to get the right message out there and to refute those that are not correct. Whether it comes from boiled water notices, people need to get tetanus shots, debris management steps, or things like FEMA's going around shooting people that aren't from Kentucky, or some other crazy conversation that comes up that you're trying to get your hands around. The nonprofits can be a force multiplier because they're the ones who are reaching every person who needs help. And if they know what message you're trying to convey to people, they can help amplify it with every hot meal they serve, or food box, or shelter in the shelters. They can be a part of rumor control. And they may be able to tell you what the real rumors are on the street of things you have no idea are being talked about. So you can filter the information that comes back from them to help you be more effective in knowing what you need to avoid, what you need to combat with misinformation that's out there in the community. I encourage you to know that this is probably one of the best things you can do as a PIO, is not only to incorporate their messaging, but to give messaging to them so that they can be a force multiplier in spreading it throughout the community. They know where the need is. They know where the people who are the most hurt in your community. So rely on them to help get critical messages to them as well. I made this in there to be facetious. Let me just say this. NGOs do not have strict requirements. Not at all. All they need to be good partners, to build winning relationships, is for you to recognize their work that they bring to the table and encourage their volunteers to continue doing what they're doing. It is so motivating to hear a story from the podium from either the FEMA administrator, the state emergency manager, or the local emergency manager, and especially the local news station, to hear a story about how their contribution is helping, and they're on camera serving a hot meal to a disaster survivor. It motivates the organization. It motivates the volunteers. When you share what they're doing, they know that you are a trusted partner. When you encourage volunteerism, it helps them have the resources they need, the manpower to help do what they're going to do anyway in serving your community. And when you promote financial support, you are actually leveraging resources in your community to rebuild, to do long-term recovery, because that's where it's needed the most, is the long term. And that's where often we're left out, because when the EOC shuts down, our PIOs oftentimes go back to day-to-day responsibility. And that's sometimes where we need the most effort, is to tell the story of what ongoing unmet needs are in the community. I wanted to leave a lot of time for conversation, so I tried to run through this very quick. If nobody asks me questions, it's going to be really bad that I ran through this so quickly. So I would love to have open dialogue here. If you want to reach out to me, my company is Rule One Consulting. I love what I do. I love working with local emergency managers, and I love telling the story about local emergency managers and the work they do, because oftentimes no one has a clue what they do. So I like championing the role that you do, what the emergency managers do on the team, and I will always be a support to you in any way that I can to help get effective messaging to help our disaster survivors navigate the crazy road to long-term recovery. Here's my information, and David, if I can open up, if this is a good time to open up for questions, I'd love to have dialogue.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kevin. That was awesome. I appreciate your passion. You can tell that you really, really do love this. So for anybody listening, anybody out there, if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question, you are welcome to do that. If you would like to put it into chat, you are welcome to do that. Kevin, I have all of your contact information and your social medias and all that stuff. I will share that after this presentation in the follow-up email, so they don't necessarily have to write that down, what's on the screen, but I will make sure that they get it. I will also make sure they get a copy of the presentation. So let me see if I've got somebody here. So Ryan asks, in regard to NGO immediate response, is it possible that NGOs may be wary of providing services without a federal disaster declaration? The Stafford Act is moot until the declaration, which would also mean that there would be no reimbursement.
I'm not going to say that that's not a valid concern for some nonprofits, but I will tell you that most of the nonprofits that I know and that I trust and have worked with for years, although that's helpful for them to go further, it's not a condition on which they serve people. And I think that those are the most valuable, that don't stand on the sideline and wait to hear about a declaration. And I will share with you that in their MOU that they should have with local government or even with the state government, it should be based upon, regardless of whether there is a federal disaster declaration. And I'll share with you that is a requirement of the Stafford Act. If you are going to be supported, you would have had to have an MOU or a partnership where you're working in partnership with the emergency management before the disaster began. And it was not conditioned upon whether or not there was a federal declaration. Now, I'll also offer to you that sometimes there are people that are that way, and shame on them. But I will tell you there are more of them that don't wait on the sidelines, that serve, and they may limit how long they can be there if there aren't any resources to help them recover. One of the secrets out there that people don't understand is that the majority of disaster response for nonprofits is in the red. They are more than they raise in most disasters. That's crazy, because we have a Stafford Act that can reimburse them, and often we don't. That will sustain them for the next disaster. And some of you get frustrated, I know I do, with emergency management, working through emergency management, is we have new players every disaster at organizations, and there's high turnover. Well, one of the reasons there's such high turnover is because those nonprofits can't keep them, because they spent all their money and went into the red, and now they're struggling as a nonprofit to continue to exist because they didn't want to let people go without being served. And as a result, they killed themselves. The organization is what I'm speaking of. Sorry, that's a terrible expression. But the organization ended up over-serving, and they weren't able to sustain through the disaster themselves. And let's remember, they're all nonprofits. These are nonprofits, which are small businesses. And most of us know from every presentation you've ever gone to is that 40% of the businesses in the community fail after a major disaster. But one of the reasons nonprofits fail is because they overextend themselves. We can't let that happen, and we should be champions for them. Sorry, I just saw somebody drop a question in there about Asbury. Yes, I went to Asbury University, Asbury College at the time. It was still when they only had one blinking flashing light in the town. But anyway, sorry, I digress.
So, Kevin, so I got a couple more comments. So, John says, thank you for the presentation. It was great information. Marilyn says, this helped me reframe the larger role of the PIO and emergency management agencies. And then the one that you looked at, Perry mentioned Asbury. She would like to have more information regarding the Stafford Act. She said she did Google it as you spoke, but if you have any other information that you can provide, she would love that. And
Awesome.
then Marilyn asks, what was the policy manual you mentioned?
Well, I can, and that is 100% me talking jargon. I should not. So I'm going to give you the acronym real quick because everybody messes it up in the terminology of what it actually is, but it's PAPPG. That is Paul Alpha or Papa, PAPPG. A lot of P's in there. It is the Public Assistance Program and Policy Guide. It is what guides all the public assistance. And if talk to your emergency manager and you will know that is the document that is extremely frustrating. It lays everything out, but it shows kind of how arduous the reimbursements and all that kind of stuff is. But it highlights specifically the donated resources policy. It talks about what you can reimburse with nonprofits and what services are reimbursable. It tells you, and you as a PIO need to know this, when you stand at a podium and they say there's a federal disaster declaration, well, that doesn't mean the same thing as what categories are under that declaration. Is it A and B? Is it C through G? There's a whole lot of things that are highlighted in that Papa G. And you as a PIO need to be very careful as using the terminology. We have received a declaration. If you're not really sure what those declarations mean and what categories have been activated for your event. It also helps you tell the story about what resources are available to people once those programs have kicked in. So I see somebody's already put it in the chat. Papa G, PAPPG is Public Assistance Program and Policy Guide. It's a FEMA document.
Yes, that was Ryan that put it in there. Thank you, Ryan. There were two of them. He put the old one, then the new one. I will make sure that I include a link to the new one in the follow-up email that I send out later this week or early next week. Are there any other questions for Kevin? If nobody has one, I have one, Kevin. I'm going to tell on myself. I'm always very proud of my networking ability. I'm very proud of my phone. My phone has a bazillion contacts, it seems. But I will be honest, I have fewer non-governmental organization contacts than anything else. So from both the state perspective and from the local county level, how does one begin to identify who is a local partner, who is a regional partner, who is a state partner, so that they may begin introducing themselves, doing that networking thing, getting their contact information in their phone so that when something happens, they know who to call?
That is a great question. So I'll step in it. Let's start for local. If you are a local PIO, you're working for local emergency management, whatever gatherings you already have. So don't go and have to book a new meeting. Look at those gatherings you already have or participate in from a county government perspective or an emergency management perspective, and identify those in the group as to who works for organizations that might provide services during disaster. And then challenge them, because I will tell you the biggest missing piece in this is we don't think that if it's not the Red Cross or the Salvation Army, that it's a legitimate disaster response organization. But yet many of us go to a house of worship, whatever day of the week that you worship on, and you know that your church is going to want to be involved in disaster, but it's never crossed your mind to make sure they're on the call list or they're integrated into your public information. So you can do that now. Assess that with whatever community leaders opportunities you have, your public broadcasting on getting the message about tornado safety or flood safety this year. Get a message out and say, if your organization has a role in disaster or would like a mission in disaster, we'd love to bring you in and have a conversation with you. And if that doesn't work, then have a meeting. Pull people together and say, we'd like to have a meeting with all of our faith-based community, all of our community and faith-based organizations that exist, including houses of worship. We'd love to get together and tell you how important you are to us. And we'd like to tell the story of maybe put a plan together on what we can do to serve people in times of disaster. And you'll get them, especially if you ask the county commissioner or you have the mayor come to that meeting. They'll come just to be seen. I'm a preacher's kid, man. My dad would go to any meeting when there was a public official just so he could go in and meet the public official. Nobody call my dad after this. That's not appropriate. But it is an interest of you bring a forum together where they can be recognized, and then you have these conversations with them. And I encourage you to do that at local level. From a state level, you already know a lot of the players, and if you don't, your commission on community service. Now I can't remember what Kentucky's called. I'm so sorry about this. You do have an active VOAD at the state level, but you also have a commission on community service that actually goes out and works with volunteer partners all the time. Jump on a call with them because they have routine calls about different initiatives from the governor's office that works with faith and community-based organizations all the time throughout the year. So jump on those calls and say, we would love you as a partner before the next disaster because we know you're going to serve people during the disaster. Undoubtedly, now I had an opportunity to work, as you saw in my resume, working in the administrator's office at FEMA for a few years in the previous Trump administration as the director of faith and opportunity initiatives. And what was mind-boggling to me is I would go into local communities and meet faith leaders who said, I never knew that I was welcome at the table. I always felt like the EOC was for professionals, and I wasn't eligible to walk in and tell them what we were doing. And I was like, what a travesty. You should always be welcome. And emergency management, all the time, they think that people are just going to come to the table, but they don't know that people's perception is kind of like being at the cool kids table at high school. You never want to go over there because they're having very important conversations that are way cooler than anything you can be a part of. And you go over there and you find out they're talking about warts or something like that. Yeah, they talk like I do. Well, that's the same thing. Sometimes these things inhibit us from having conversations when they shouldn't. People just don't feel welcome at the table, not because we've made them feel that way. They just don't. So when you reach out and say, you are welcome to our conversation, we would love to have you tell us how we could do better, they come running. And that's what I would tell you, whether you're at the local, state, regional, tribal, any of those entities, welcome them to the table so you can have really strong conversations. And I'm telling you, it will grow enormously when they feel welcome.
Excellent. Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate that so much. I am going to take the screen back. If anybody still has questions, you are absolutely welcome to unmute yourself and ask that question. You can put them in chat. We are getting a little short on time, but we still got a few minutes. So if anybody wants to do that, you can. Once again, I want to thank you, Kevin, for being here, for giving the presentation. I appreciate it. It's all great information. I'm starting a plan for myself to improve my networking and increase the number of contacts I have on my phone as we speak. I do want to do a couple of quick announcements for what we have coming up. See if I got something here in chat. So yes, Alicia says, thank you so much. Excellent information as always. So everybody has my contact. You get my emails, but if you ever have any questions about any of these webinars, please feel free to contact me, call, email, text. I'm always available. As always, I'm going to post a recording of this on our YouTube channel. Here's our upcoming schedule. We have a lot of good stuff coming up. Next month, we're going to talk to somebody from CSEPP, the organization for the earthquakes down in Memphis, our regional earthquake consortium, and they're going to specifically talk about community lifelines and public information. I'm looking forward to that. If you've never heard of community lifelines, I highly encourage you to join us. Brian is going to start from the beginning and explain everything to you, so it's going to be great. In October, we have rebooked Jeanette Sutton. She had something come up and couldn't do a presentation for us. So we've got her rescheduled for October 15th, effective alerts and warnings. In November, I have somebody scheduled to talk about AI and social media. I personally attended one of her webinars, and she is fantastic. If you come to that webinar, I would say there's like a 99% chance she's going to ask you to get on an AI application while the webinar is going on. Do something, see what the results are, and then try to help you improve your results. So it's great. And then like last year, we're gonna cancel the December webinar. Holidays, everybody's got a lot of stuff going on, so we're just gonna skip December and kick it right back off in January of 2026. Can you believe I'm talking about January 2026 already? It's crazy. So one last request. Anybody have any questions for Kevin before we let him go? Hearing none, again, thank you, Kevin. I appreciate it. It was fantastic. Everybody have a great day, and we will see you next month.